ready to trace a trail of hope that starts in an apricot seed and ends in, well, a legal, medical, and political firestorm.
Absolutely. This story isn't just about chemical structure. It's a profound dive into human desperation and the fierce power of anti-establishment belief.
I'm Justine Burke.
And I'm Lance Samart.
And this is the Pharma Files.
Where medicine meets mystery.
Okay, let's unpack this for you. We are plunging deep into the bizarre and, really compelling history of Laetrile.
Right. This was the so-called cancer cure that galvanized a whole generation in the 1970s. It became this ultimate symbol of defiance against the medical establishment.
Just sources you've provided give us a truly complete narrative, and we're going to follow this incredible and honestly heartbreaking story step by step.
What's so fascinating here is understanding precisely how a relatively simple and, let's be clear, toxic chemical compound could transform into a national cultural and political force.
So where do we even begin?
I think we need to be in our journey where thousands of patients concluded theirs.
Okay.
Across the border in Tijuana.
Yeah, let's set the scene. We open with this single, really powerful image that I think encapsulates the entire movement. It's a woman. She's arriving in the warm, dry Tijuana morning. She is flown, maybe overnight, from somewhere cold like Chicago or the gray of New England.
And she's crossing the border at dawn. You can just feel this mixture of exhaustion and, frankly, desperate hope.
And she's clinging to this envelope of medical records. It's like the weight of her diagnosis is right there, physically, in a sheaf of paper.
Yeah, and the sources paint such a vivid picture of the scene. You have these low-slung stucco buildings, very common to the borderlands, painted in these faded desert colors, peach, dusty rose, pale blue.
It's such a contrast to the kinds of places she's probably just left.
Oh, completely. A total contrast to the sterile, towering glass and steel hospitals back in the States. The clinic itself, maybe it's called the Instituto de Medicina Metabolica, it's marked by just a simple, discrete metal sign. It sounds both routine and, at the same time, profoundly significant.
The whole journey feels like a rite of passage,
It is.
She finally reaches the clinic door where a guard, maybe a kind elderly man, holds it open for her. And that single gesture signals that this isn't just a commercial transaction. This is a sanctuary.
This is the end of the road.
And stepping inside, the atmosphere is just so crucial to understanding the Laetrile phenomenon.
Right. The air is noticeably different. It's cool, faintly medicinal, but maybe also tinged with the aroma of brewed herbal tea or vitamin infusions. It's an environment that's been meticulously crafted to counter that cold, clinical feel of a major American oncology ward.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The people inside. The sources describe them as looking both hopeful and hollowed out.
A powerful phrase.
It is. They're all united by this one fact. Conventional medicine has run out of options for them. You see IV poles standing around like metallic sentries, waiting to administer treatments.
And families are speaking in these low, urgent tones, sharing stories of, temporary relief and these miraculous-sounding recoveries. It's a waiting room that's just filled with a desperate consensus.
That consensus is the key, isn't it?
It's everything. Back in Houston or Boston, she heard statistics, cold weeks, grueling percentages. Everything was couched in the language of protocols and probabilities.
But here, the language is different. A nurse or a practitioner smiles, maybe places a gentle hand on her shoulder, and assures her she's arrived at the right place, the only place.
And the promise they deliver is so seductive because it's so simple. The therapy, Laetrile, is made from apricot seeds. It's extracted from nature.
The narrative sold to these desperate people is just incredibly compelling. This cure, they're told, is being actively suppressed. It's being held back in the U.S. by self-serving bureaucrats and these billion-dollar drug companies who refuse to allow a treatment that can't be patented.
And that last point is the absolute masterstroke of the marketing.
Because if it can't be patented,
it can't be monopolized.
Okay.
And therefore, its suppression must be proof that it works.
Yeah.
It's a perfect circle of logic for them.
The brochures called it Laetrile. The testimonials called it a miracle. For this woman who has exhausted all of medicine's brutal instruments, this necessary belief is, well, it's everything.
And her story, her lost name, it's emblematic of thousands of pilgrims during the fevered reign of Laetrile in the 1970s.
Tijuana wasn't just a physical location. It was, as one course put it, a last-chance borderland where hope, science, politics, and desperation all fused together. It created this unique and profoundly powerful medical movement.
It's truly difficult to reconcile the context, though. By the 1970s, this substance had been dismissed by professional oncologists, seized by the FDA, rejected by every major cancer research center.
It was outlawed in many U.S. states.
Right, and yet it flourished. It spread through grassroots political action, newsletters, talk shows, and these vast underground networks.
Wait, I have to pause on that. It was dismissed by the experts, but it spread anyway? What was the mechanism for that? Why didn't the warnings stick?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Laetrile flourished precisely because it became more than just a therapy. It was a potent symbol.
A symbol of what?
It represented autonomy, defiance, a philosophical resistance against a medical industrial system that many people felt had failed or abandoned them.
That makes sense. If your doctor tells you, we can only prolong your life by 6 months with agonizing chemotherapy, and then an advocate tells you, the answer is in a natural seed and the government is hiding it.
Which narrative offers more psychological comfort, more agency? It's not even a contest.
It's the latter, especially when you combine it with the huge distrust of the 1970s, which we'll get into. It provided not just a cure, but a reason for the illness and an enemy to fight.
Exactly.
So to really understand this modern craze, we have to go way back, over a century, to the chemistry itself.
To amygdalin.
Right, the substance Laetrile is derived from. This is long before the politics, back to the messy, fascinating beginnings of modern chemistry in the 1830s.
That's where the trail begins. European scientists working in these laborious 19th century conditions, they first isolated amygdalin.
And it wasn't just from apricot kernels.
No, they found it in bitter almonds, cherry pits, apple seeds, all kinds of stone fruit seeds.
Yeah.
And the process was grueling. Crushing, maceration, solvent washes, careful filtering, all to get this distinct crystalline compound.
And its behavior was puzzling, right? That's the key chemical paradox that both attracted and eventually repelled scientists.
Precisely. Amygdalin is what's known as a cyanogenic glycoside.
Which means?
It means that when the compound is broken down by certain enzymes, specifically beta-glucosidase, which we will come back to, and especially the enzymes found abundantly in the human gut, it releases hydrogen cyanide.
A notorious poison.
One of the most famous poisons, known for its rapid toxicity. It was just fascinating to scientists that this known lethal substance was locked away inside something as ordinary as a fruit kernel.
It's kind of mind-boggling that they even tried to use it medically, knowing that risk.
But you have to remember the context of 19th century medicine. I mean, it was an era where remedies were often based on extreme efficacy, regardless of toxicity.
Good point.
Arsenic was a common tonic. Mercury was used for syphilis. Anything that produced visible, dramatic physiological effects, even dangerous ones, was considered worth exploring. A drug that could make you violently ill or potentially heal you was seen as powerful.
And there are scattered references in the medical literature from that time detailing these early amygdalin experiments.
Yes. Doses were administered very cautiously for everything from coughs and chest ailments to, in a few truly daring cases, treating tumors.
But the problem was consistency.
Always. The results varied wildly. Some physicians noted transient minor improvements in appetite or pain, which might have just been a brief euphoria from small doses.
But others recorded
Severe, undeniable toxicity, vomiting, dizziness, respiratory distress, and unfortunately patient deaths. The toxicity was always this looming, unpredictable problem.
So this raises an important question. If it was showing any positive signs, even tiny ones, why do the reputable journals and serious researchers abandon it so completely by the late 1800s?
Because it was too inconsistent, too toxic, and ultimately too unpredictable to standardize. It just looked like a relic of an earlier, rougher, experimental age.
And medicine was changing.
Massively. By the late 19th century, medicine was moving toward germ theory, controlled laboratory standards, greater professional rigor. Amygdalin, with its unpredictable cyanide releases, just didn't fit the new paradigm. It retreated into the forgotten footnotes of medical history.
But I imagine the underlying idea that a cure could come from nature, from a bitter plant that had a certain sticky allure that never quite died.
It absolutely did. The idea that a cancer clue might lie in a bitter plant or a food pit fit the widespread culture of botanicals.
Like tinctures of foxglove, willow bark.
Poultices of willow bark, keys made from obscure roots. The apothecary shelves were lined with plant-based treatments, and that tradition never vanished. It just moved to the fringes of medicine.
And there was a brief resurfacing in Europe, right, in Germany and Russia during the early 20th century.
Correct. Spurred by some early nutritional hypotheses, they tried to revive it under these broad biochemical balance theories. But again, the clinical results were consistently inconclusive and continually overshadowed by the compound's toxicity.
So it just stayed dormant.
It remained a powerful chemical idea, a weed root beneath winter soil, as one source put it, just waiting for the right people, the right political climate, and the right rebranding for its myth to take powerful national root.
And the right people arrived in the mid-20th century, and they didn't just revive it, they fundamentally changed the whole debate by rebranding the substance.
And the central figure here is Ernst T. Krebs, Jr., a true genius of self-promotion and alternative theorizing.
Krebs Jr. was the defining character in this saga, charismatic, a restless thinker, and he consciously positioned himself outside the mainstream.
He really did. He lived in the borderlands of scientific ambition and self-invention, always projecting this force of authority and expecting to be listened to.
And yet he notably lacked the formal credentials he often implied he had.
That's a key point. He moved through multiple universities, Illinois, Hahnemann, Mississippi, UC, without ever completing a degree at any of them. He was an autodidact, a brilliant amateur, and he compensated for that lack of diplomas with relentless drive and an incredible gift for language.
What's so fascinating is how he used that outsider status. He and his father, Ernst T. Krebs Sr., who was an unconventional physician himself, with a focus on metabolic imbalances, they operated entirely outside traditional structures.
Their world was one of kitchen laboratory experiments and these typewritten manifestos. And it was all unified by a deep core suspicion that the established medical system was either corrupt, unimaginative, or actively suppressing better treatments.
And this suspicion led to Krebs Jr.'s truly audacious intellectual leap in the early 1950s, redefining the nature of cancer itself.
Exactly. This is the foundation of the entire movement. Instead of accepting the standard pathological view of cancer as a malicious, malignant transformation of cells, Krebs argued it was fundamentally a nutritional deficiency.
He compared it to classic deficiency diseases, things that are easy to treat and prevent, like scurvy from a lack of vitamin C or pellagra from a lack of niacin.
And if cancer was merely a missing nutrient, the cure was simple dietary restoration. This is the moment the crucial reclassification happens.
Amygdalin, the toxic glycoside, is brilliantly renamed.
Vitamin B17.
That rebranding is a stroke of marketing genius.
Right.
I mean, it strips away the entire association with historical toxicity and replaces it with wholesomeness, nature, vitality.
It's profoundly effective. Vitamins are inherently good. They are things your body needs. If cancer was simply the result of missing vitamin B17, then conventional oncology, the surgery, the radiation, the chemical poisoning, it wasn't just overkill, it was barbarism.
And that simple, comforting message just resonated so deeply with a public that was terrified of the harsh, almost primitive treatments available at the time.
And to create a marketable, administrable product, Krebs modified and purified amygdalin into the patented compound Laetrile.
And then he needed a theory.
Huh?
He needed to explain why this poisonous compound wouldn't poison healthy cells.
Right. So he developed this incredibly elegant, symmetrical explanation. The claim was that Laetrile would act as a natural smart bomb, releasing its toxic payload of cyanide only inside cancer cells.
And what was the mechanism for this alleged targeting?
Krebs claimed that cancer cells contained abnormally high amounts of that enzyme we mentioned, beta-glucosidase, the enzyme required to cleave the amygdalin molecule and release the cyanide.
And healthy cells?
Healthy cells, conversely, allegedly had high levels of a different enzyme, rhodinase, which would detoxify the cyanide before it could do any damage.
The scientific evidence for this miraculous selectivity was
utterly non-existent.
Right.
Precisely. But the idea, it had symmetry. It had a great metaphor. It had the seductive confidence of something that felt like it should be true. It offered a simple, elegant theory for targeted treatment, a vast improvement over the blunt instruments of surgery and generalized chemotherapy that mainstream medicine offered.
And the Krebs family was highly effective at cultivating their support base. They knew exactly which communities were primed for this kind of skepticism.
They deliberately targeted chiropractors, naturopaths, renegade MDs communities that were already philosophically skeptical of pharmaceutical companies and government regulation. Laetrile circulated as a kind of secret, vital knowledge within this medical underground.
And critically, every time the FDA or the American Medical Association issued a condemnation, it didn't stop the movement. It actually hardened supporters' resolve.
It just fed the narrative. They interpreted any pushback as absolute proof of validity and institutional suppression. It perfectly fit the persecution narrative Krebs had constructed.
If they were trying to hide it, it must work.
Exactly. It was a self-reinforcing echo chamber.
And then you get to the 1970s, which provided the absolute perfect cultural soil for Laetrile to sprout from a fringe curiosity into a full-blown national movement.
A perfect storm of social instability and scientific fear.
The cultural crucible of that decade was just defined by deep systemic disillusionment. We had Watergate, the failure in Vietnam, widespread environmental pollution fears.
A growing holistic back-to-nature consciousness. There was a deep, pervasive distrust of government, corporations, and established institutions, including medicine. People felt lied to by authority across the board.
And overlaying all of that was the specter of cancer itself. It was so poorly understood. Treatments were often agonizingly brutal. We're talking about primitive chemotherapy and crude radiation, and survival rates were terribly low.
A cancer diagnosis was seen almost universally as a death sentence, and patients often felt dehumanized, dismissed by a medical system that prioritized procedures over empathy.
Laetrile stepped directly into this massive emotional vacuum. It offered not just hope, but agency. It provided 4 key emotional benefits that traditional medicine, in its mid-century coldness, simply couldn't match.
Okay, let's break those 4 down. The first one is the natural solution.
Right. It came from fruit seeds, not chemical labs. It was pure, ancestral, wholesome, a complete rejection of modern industrial complexity.
Second, the simple, elegant theory. The deficiency model, which suggested that the illness wasn't some curse or a random mutation, but just a correctable dietary imbalance.
Third, the compelling narrative of suppression.
And that gave suffering meaning. The illness wasn't random. It was proof of government and corporate conspiracy.
And fourth, and this is maybe the most important, a promise of autonomy. The patient, not the doctor, chose the path.
And this gave patients control when they felt utterly helpless. The movement was communal, it was spiritual, it was intensely emotional. It offered a complete framework that placed the patient's beliefs and desires at the center, a stark contrast to the cold, often patronizing attitude many felt from mainstream oncologists.
Now we need to discuss the political architects of the movement. The McNaughton machine.
Yes. The wealthy California ranching family that transformed Laetrile from a fringe health issue into a major political cause.
They were the financial and political engine, crucial to the movement's ability to transcend health food stores and hit state legislatures.
The McNaughtons saw the FDA's seizure of Laetrile shipments not as scientific oversight, but as an attack on the independent American spirit. They poured significant resources into funding advocacy groups, promotional films, newsletters, and sympathetic, though fundamentally unscientific studies.
And they were brilliant lobbyists because they realized the science wasn't the winning argument.
Right.
They focused the entire debate on political rights.
Absolutely. Their central framing was, who gets to decide what treatment a dying patient can pursue Washington bureaucrats, or the patient themselves, in consultation with their chosen doctor? They argued that denial of access to an unapproved, quote-unquote, non-toxic drug was an unconstitutional act of tyranny.
That message was stunningly potent in a post-Watergate America, which was already deeply skeptical of federal authority. It just hit the anti-authoritarian nerves perfectly.
And this political framing led to a legislative wildfire that swept the country between 1975 and 1981.
Over 20 states legalized Laetrile.
Over 20 states, often overriding strong objections from state medical associations and even gubernatorial vetoes.
20 states. That's remarkable. How did they achieve that level of legislative success against overwhelming medical advice?
The state hearings were dramatic, almost theatrical events. The rhetoric was purely about freedom, individual rights, and the perceived tyranny of the FDA. Pro-Laetrile politicians positioned themselves as these populist champions of the common person against the arrogance of experts and pharmaceutical interests.
Okay, let's unpack the core mechanism of their success here. It was the emotional impact of the testimonials.
This was the McNaughton machine's secret weapon. Yeah. Gaunt, trembling patients and their tearful family members would appear before legislators, describing temporary relief lesson to pain, a brief return of appetite, a feeling of hope.
And these powerful stories became evidence.
Exactly. Legislators who were attuned to emotional testimony were far more convinced by a dying constituent than by some clinical summary from a Harvard oncologist.
And we know now why those testimonials felt so true. Some were strong placebo effects, the hope alone creating temporary relief. Some patients were misinterpreting natural fluctuations in their disease.
And many were getting powerful temporary relief from steroid injections the clinics administered, which had absolutely nothing to do with Laetrile.
And crucially, these testimonials helped the McNaughtons shift the very definition of success.
Yes. If Laetrile didn't cure the cancer, but simply allowed the patient to die with hope and dignity, choosing their own path, wasn't that a success in itself? This redefined framework allowed the movement to just bypass the need for scientific rigor altogether.
This political groundwork created a massive funnel of patients, all heading toward that last chance borderland.
Right. As the legislative battles raged in the U.S., Tijuana became the practical heart of the movement, a vital sanctuary where American regulatory reach ended and the promise could be fully delivered.
Tijuana's permissive regulatory climate and its geographic convenience just made it the ideal intersection of hope and commerce.
The Mexican government, often influenced by a long tradition of folk remedies and less strict pharmaceutical regulation, just gave these practitioners wide latitude to operate.
And the clinics themselves varied wildly.
Oh, absolutely. It reflected the gold rush environment. The sources detail the whole range. Some are sophisticated, multi-story stucco buildings with marble entrances, looking like tranquil, expensive retreats with fountains and gardens.
And others.
Others were clearly just converted storefronts where thin curtains stood in for proper walls.
But regardless of the decor, they all offered the same core promise: a personalized cure without the brutality of chemotherapy, a healing journey separated from the cold, time-driven metrics of oncology wards back home.
The pilgrimage itself symbolized leaving the toxic world behind.
And crucially, the therapeutic environment was often deeply, genuinely humane.
It was. The staff nurses, support workers, they were instructed to spend unhurried time with patients and their families, emphasizing holistic healing, diet, rest, emotional well-being, detoxification protocols.
Patients felt seen, not processed. They were asked about their sleep, their spiritual peace, their emotional burdens, questions many felt their overstressed conventional oncologists had rarely had time for.
So the care environment, separate from the merit of Laetrile itself, was deeply therapeutic. It offered dignity and agency.
However, this facade of personalized, holistic care masked a critical financial and physical danger.
A huge danger.
Let's start with the physical danger. Laetrile was generally administered intravenously in the clinics, often in high, untested doses, but the real danger lay with the required metabolic diet they recommended for home use.
This is the critical danger point we have to emphasize. The metabolic diet required oral consumption of Laetrile, often in pill form, combined with its source materials. Large amounts of raw almonds, apricot kernels eaten as snacks.
And massive doses of supplemental vitamin C. Why was that combination so lethal?
Because when amygdalin or Laetrile is broken down in the acidic environment of the stomach, and especially when mixed with the enzymes present in raw nuts and the high acid from vitamin C, the rate of cyanide liberation accelerates dramatically.
So it's a dangerous cocktail.
It was a potent, dangerous cocktail of substances, disguised as a return to ancestral wisdom. This boosted toxicity to dangerous levels, causing severe neurological symptoms and sometimes death.
So a recipe for chronic poisoning marketed as holistic healing. And on top of that, the clinics perpetuated the illusion of success by often administering steroid injections.
Yes, steroids are fast-acting. They stimulate appetite, reduce inflammation, and give patients a temporary burst of energy.
And patients and their families, who were so desperate for a sign, misinterpreted this temporary physical boost as evidence that the tumor was shrinking or dissolving. A powerful, if tragic, illusion of success that just reinforced the whole mythology.
And this false hope came at an exorbitant price, which fueled the entire ecosystem.
The exploitation was rampant.
Absolutely. Clinics demanded exorbitant fees, often thousands of dollars up front, forcing families to sell cars, mortgage homes, or liquidate their life savings. They also pushed a dizzying array of additional supplements and detox kits, coffee enemas, specialized enzyme pills, all with no scientific grounding but extremely high prices.
And the emotional velocity of it all was staggering. The testimonials about tumors softening and pain dissolving, whether real, placebo, or steroid-induced, they spread faster than the quiet cautionary tales or the evidence of cyanide poisoning. It formed this self-perpetuating mythology that just defied medical gravity.
And the narrative of Laetrile wasn't just built on brochures and political rhetoric. It was cemented by specific, high-profile, and utterly devastating human stories that capture the national imagination.
We have to begin with the tragic Chad Green case, which spanned from 1977 to 1979. This involved a 2-year-old child diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia, which was a treatable cancer even at the time.
His parents, the Greens, they rejected the harsh standard chemotherapy protocol in favor of the perceived gentler path of Laetrile. They were completely convinced by the anti-establishment literature.
And this immediately sparked a fierce, agonizing legal fight in Massachusetts over medical custody.
The core question for the courts was unprecedented. Did parents have the right to choose an unproven, potentially dangerous therapy over a scientifically proven one for a minor child? When the authorities insisted chemotherapy was necessary, the parents fled with Chad across the continent to a Mexican clinic.
The case became a national media frenzy. It played out like a true crime drama, but with the child's life at stake. Chad Green was instantly seized upon as a symbol.
He died in 1979, and the subsequent autopsy confirmed what critics had feared all along: evidence of cyanide compounds in his tissues, likely accelerating his decline.
And the interpretation was instantly polarized. To critics, the case symbolized the deadly dangers of false hope and the tragedy of medical negligence driven by misinformation.
But to supporters, it represented tragic, heavy-handed government interference that persecuted a family and drove them across the border. It proved that the authorities cared more about protocol than a child's life.
Then you have the dramatic entry of celebrity, Steve McQueen. In 1979, he was diagnosed with malignant pleural mesothelioma, an aggressive, almost uniformly fatal cancer, often linked to asbestos exposure.
And given his enormous fame and wealth, he could have sought treatment anywhere in the world. But he chose a controversial Mexican clinic,
Seeking Laetrile infusions, coffee enemas, nutritional regimens, and eventually a very risky surgery.
His illness and his choice thrust Laetrile into the mainstream conversation like nothing before. The sheer volume of media coverage guaranteed that millions who had never even heard of vitamin B17 were now aware of the great suppressed cure that Hollywood royalty was pursuing.
And when he died in 1980, the debate just raged. Did the therapy prolong his life, as advocates claimed, or did it waste precious time and resources, robbing him of potentially better care?
Finally, we should briefly touch on the scientific-sounding claims that advocates used, specifically the Georgia-claimed study from 1978.
Right. This was something they pointed to as proof.
Advocates continually cited this observational study, claiming it showed improved survival among Laetrile patients compared to historical controls. It gave the movement a veneer of scientific legitimacy.
But the flaws, upon independent examination, were profound. It suffered from extreme methodological biases. The study omitted patients who died shortly after beginning treatment. That's a huge omission bias.
It included patients who had been misdiagnosed with cancer entirely, which completely confuses the results. And crucially, it lacked any proper controlled comparison group.
So as soon as the data was subjected to independent reanalysis by serious statisticians,
the results just evaporated. This illustrates how quickly an anecdotal observation or a fundamentally flawed study could be weaponized as proof in the emotional vacuum of cancer treatment, only to crumble under real rigor.
the true scientific battleground, though, where the narrative of suppression reached its national peak, was the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York.
One of the most prestigious research institutions in the world.
The stakes were astronomical. If Sloan Kettering supported Laetrile, it would gain immediate global legitimacy. If they rejected it, they knew they would inevitably be accused of being part of the vast corporate and governmental conspiracy.
And this internal drama centered on one man, Dr. Kanematsu Sujura, a respected, meticulous, and elderly Japanese scientist who had worked at Sloan Kettering for decades. In 1972, he began testing Laetrile in laboratory mice with implanted mammary tumors.
And Sujira's initial findings were cautious, but they were seized upon immediately. He noted a modest reduction in lung metastases in the treated mice.
Meaning the cancer hadn't spread as much to the lungs. But crucially, Sujira was very clear. Laetrile did not shrink the primary tumors, nor did it significantly extend the overall survival time of the mice.
But advocates ignored those vital caveats.
Completely. They zeroed in exclusively on the reduction in metastases and leaked the results to the media, proclaiming Sujira's work as scientific proof that Laetrile worked.
This put the institution in a terrible bind. Science relies on replication, not an isolated signal.
So when multiple independent Sloan Kettering teams tried to reproduce Sujira's limited findings, they failed repeatedly.
Using the exact same protocols, subsequent teams found no difference in metastases, no tumor shrinkage, no improved survival, and most importantly, no meaningful biological effect compared to simple saline injections.
Laetrile was inert in the hands of the replicators.
This created a massive, tense internal conflict within Sloan Kettering leadership. How do you communicate the failure of replication without publicly dishonoring a highly respected scientist like Dr. Sujira?
And without giving irresistible ammunition to the waiting conspiracy theorists.
The leadership worried intensely about misleading vulnerable patients. They circulated these tense, cautious internal memos, insisting on using language like preliminary, inconclusive, and emphasizing the failure to replicate. They were trying to respect the methodical scientific process while managing a public relations nightmare.
And into this charged, cautious atmosphere stepped Ralph W. Moss, a writer and PR employee hired by the institution.
Moss was privy to these internal debates. He listened to the disagreements among the researchers, and he perceived the caution not as rigor, but as active concealment. He became convinced that positive data was being softened or buried to protect pharmaceutical interests.
To Moss, the institution he worked for was afraid of challenging the powerful drug companies. And this interpretation that the science was suppressed for profit, it shaped the entire subsequent narrative of the movement, even though the scientists running the failed replication tests vehemently rejected this characterization.
So in 1977, Moss went public.
He did. He convened a secret press conference outside the hospital, publicly accusing Sloan Kettering leadership of hiding positive Laetrile data. He emphasized Sujira's early, limited finding and claimed the entire institution was bowing to political and pharmaceutical pressure.
And the reaction was immediate and dramatic. Moss was famously fired by noon the next day, which just solidified his status as a martyr and a heroic whistleblower for the Laetrile cause.
What's fascinating here is the collision of cultures. The slow, painstaking, methodical nature of rigorous science, the necessity of replication and verification, was instantly twisted into a narrative of secrecy and corruption by the Moss affair.
Protesters immediately started marching outside the center with signs demanding the truth, and the Moss affair entered the vocabulary of anti-establishment health activism overnight.
And what did Dr. Sujira himself say throughout this whole ordeal?
Sujira, with his characteristic humility, never wavered from his original limited observation. He never claimed Laetrile cured cancer, and he always insisted that his initial finding required full, independent replication before any conclusion could be drawn.
But his calm, scientific perspective was utterly ignored by the political and emotional fervor that surrounded his work. The public preferred the dramatic narrative of the conspiracy over the tedious process of scientific verification.
Ultimately, the scientific consensus had to catch up to the myth, providing definitive proof against the claims that had driven the movement for over a decade.
And we circle back to the chemistry. Laetrile's core claim that natural smart bomb theory of selective enzyme release was fundamentally rejected by biochemical analysis throughout the 60s and 70s.
Okay, let's make this crystal clear for the listener. How exactly did the biochemistry disprove the smart bomb theory?
The theory required two things to be true. First, that cancer cells possess massive, unique amounts of the key enzyme, beta-glucosidase. And second, that healthy cells have a protective detoxification enzyme called rhodinase.
And rigorous analysis showed
That neither claim was reliably true. Meaning there was no unique selective enzyme found in cancer cells to activate the cyanide payload. And, critically, there were numerous biochemical pathways for cyanide release in healthy tissue all throughout the body. There was no plausible, differential mechanism for the drug to target tumors without poisoning the host. The theory just failed at the cellular level.
Still, proponents had a persistent claim. They hadn't been given a fair, definitive clinical test of their full regimen. They argued that lab results in mice were irrelevant.
This led directly to the decisive action taken by the U.S. government. The National Institutes of Health recognized the need for an unimpeachable, gold standard trial. They collaborated with the prestigious Mayo Clinic to conduct what became the definitive clinical test.
And the Mayo Clinic trial was rigorous. They enrolled 178 patients with advanced measurable cancers, and they administered the precise Laetrile plus the full metabolic diet regimen advocated by the proponents. They wanted to test the entire system as prescribed in the Tijuana clinics.
The results were published in 1982, and they were unequivocal. After a period of observation, researchers found no objective benefit whatsoever.
Nothing.
No measurable tumor shrinkage, no symptom relief attributable to Laetrile, and absolutely no survival benefit compared to historical controls.
And in fact, the trial confirmed the danger. Some patients developed clear signs of cyanide poisoning, requiring emergency treatment.
Laetrile's scientific credibility officially and definitively dissolved with those published findings.
But again, movements like this rarely collapse based on data alone. The legal war continued to rage, fueled by that narrative of rights and freedom.
Which brings us to the ultimate legal conflict, the landmark Supreme Court case, Rutherford v. United States, 1979.
This case pitted the terminally ill against the FDA. Patients argued for a constitutional right to use unapproved drugs, claiming that since they had no other options, the government shouldn't stand in their way.
They were literally arguing for the right to die trying.
The emotional case was incredibly powerful, but the legal reality was different. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously against the patients.
They reasoned that the FDA's authority to regulate and require proof of safety and effectiveness applied to all drugs intended for human use, regardless of the patient's prognosis. They noted that the safety standard was there not just to prevent outright death, but to ensure that patients weren't steered away from effective therapies by fraudulent ones.
So what does this all mean for the two sides? To regulators, the ruling was a crucial victory for scientific oversight and the rule of law.
But to Laetrile supporters, it was final proof that the government prioritized pharmaceutical profits and cold bureaucratic protocol over individual lives. It effectively confirmed the McNaughton narrative and created martyrs out of the terminally ill.
So by the early 1980s, facing disproven efficacy from the Mayo Clinic trial, growing news skepticism, and the Supreme Court ruling, the Laetrile movement fractured.
Right. State legalization laws were quietly repealed across the country.
However, the decline was certainly not a disappearance. The legacy of Laetrile persists today.
Oh, absolutely. The clinics in Mexico still offer it. Online vendors sell apricot kernels explicitly labeled as vitamin B17. And the same types of testimonials circulate constantly on social media, echoing those same stories from the 1970s.
It remains in circulation because it fulfills an incredibly powerful, enduring emotional need.
It does. It speaks directly to the fundamental human fear of suffering, the limits of conventional medicine, and that powerful desire to believe that nature holds simple answers hidden from institutional control.
It also serves as a perfect historical case study. It demonstrates that scientific debates, once they're thoroughly politicized and given a compelling conspiracy narrative, they rarely end cleanly with data.
The emotional investment in the narrative of suppression just allows the belief system to survive the scientific disproof.
The true legacy is not scientific, it's purely human. It's the story of thousands of Americans who sold everything and crossed the border seeking salvation in fruit pits, driven by hope when all other doors were closed.
The movement did not cure cancer, but it revealed with heartbreaking clarity the lengths to which the human mind will go to reclaim hope and agency in the face of mortality.
That history is just staggering. It shows how powerful the narrative of suppression can be when people are at their most vulnerable, and how easily chemical facts can be utterly overwritten by political and emotional fervor. It forces us to ask tough questions about the system that created the vacuum Laetrile filled.
Indeed. And the tension between the need for rigorous, evidence-based science and the profound human desire for quick, natural fixes for that simple, elegant answer is still very much alive today. It informs every current debate we have over alternative therapies.
This was an incredibly detailed look at how a chemical curiosity transformed into a political and emotional pilgrimage site, forcing us to examine the critical intersection of desperation and dogma.
And this raises an important question for you to consider, our listener. What are the necessary and complementary roles of both rigorous scientific evidence and profoundly compassionate, holistic care when navigating diseases that are incurable?
Are these two approaches mutually exclusive, or can they coexist without sacrificing the necessary rigor that's required to keep patients safe?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the extraordinary history of Laetrile.
We hope this knowledge sticks with you.